Come, drink, and be exposed. Drink from the cup of the Lord's judgment, and all your glory will be turned to shame. You cut down the forests of Lebanon. Now you will be cut down. You destroy the wild animals, so now their terror will be yours. You commit murder throughout the countryside and fill the towns with violence. What good is an idol carved by man, or a cast image that deceives you? How foolish to trust in your own creation, a God that can't even talk. What sorrow awaits you who say to the wooden idols, wake up and save us. To speechless stone images you say, rise up and teach us. Can the idol tell you what to do? They may be overlaid with the gold and silver, but they are lifeless inside. But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before him. All praises be to God for the word of God, for the people of God. That is a portion, and a good portion, of chapter 2 of Habakkuk. You have your outlines before you today, and we have tagged this teachment today from this subject, Woe to the Wicked. Woe to the wicked. When we look at this book that is called Habakkuk, that is named by the prophet, was the prophet to the people of Judah during the time of 610 to 605 BC. What we have before us today is a prophet, you all, that is facing his own personal perplexities. What he is looking at and witnessing through his nation is he is watching and witnessing a lot of injustice. He's watching a lot of crime. He's watching a lot of sin. He's watching a lot of ungodliness. And he's questioning God because God seems to be silent. So as the prophet, the man of God, is watching his nation become less holy, less God-honoring, more worldly, more materialistic, more vile. When he's watching that, he's wanting to know, where is God in the midst of all of this? So many times we find ourselves as the people of God asking ourselves, where is God, when we find ourselves in difficult times of suffering? Does he hear our faintest cry? Does he understand the struggles that we are dealing with? And when we think about that in this 21st century, the prophet Habakkuk is almost like a 21st century prophet amongst us today. Because when you look at America and where America is right now, just a couple of months past an election, there's a whole lot of questions that we have that on the bigger picture, God is already looking at and seeing, America, let me tell you about yourself. And so in a real sense, while we are the people of God and while we're in the house of God, we're not exempt even from that, because the church itself can become corrupt. The church can become so focused on itself that it misses who it's supposed to be giving glory and honor to. We can be so self-consumed and so self-centered that, Dickie boy, we miss the purpose of our existence of being here, and that is to bring glory and honor to God. And so when we look at this perplexed prophet who is dealing with the perplexities of the nation that he's looking at, just like we are looking at the country that we live in today, here it is. He goes back and he has these questions, and he has the questions that are centered around the silence of God. In other words, God, I don't hear you. God, I can't hear you speaking loudly in the midst of all of this. Where is a word from you? And the prophet is God's mouthpiece, but he's not hearing God speak to the situation. And so in a real sense, when you go back to chapter number 1, you will hear in a real sense he's crying out as he's looking at the violence in his own nation. And he is saying there in chapter number 1, verse number 2, he's saying, "O Lord, how long shall I cry and thou not hear? Even cry out unto thee violence, and thou wilt not save." There he is asking God about the violence that's taking place in the nation. Not only is he talking about it in Judah, but we're talking about it in America right now. We're seeing so much corruption. We're seeing so much violence. We're seeing so much vitriol. We're seeing so much hate. We're seeing so much anger. We're seeing a nation that is flipping and turning itself right back to what it has come out of, a nation of hate, a nation that does not appreciate diversity, a nation that is only concerned about the rich. And we're seeing the dynamics that the rich and the 1% are concerned about getting more and more richer at the plight of those of us who have built this country. He moves from that to talking about, I'm seeing wickedness prevail. The prophet is asking God, why is it that it seems like the righteous are suffering while the wicked seem to be thriving? Don't y'all think about that when you remind yourself over there in Psalms 73, where Asaph has that same dynamic when his foot almost slipped when he had his eyes on the prosperity of the wicked. And so here he is in verse number 3. Why dost thou show me all of this iniquity? Iniquity, you all, is perversion bent inward. Why are you showing me, God, all of this iniquity and causing me to behold all of the grievances? For the spoilings and the violence are before me, and there are that raise up strife and contention. Here he is asking God in a real sense, why is it that the wicked seem to be doing well? And so he moves from that to then moving, Brother Shepherd, to crying for justice, because in verse number 4 of chapter number 1, he says, therefore the law is slack, and judgment does not go forth, and the wicked does seem to compass around the right. It seems like the wicked is outnumbering the righteous. In other words, wherefore is wrong judgment seems to be perceived. Where is the justice? Why is it that it seems like the corrupt seems to be more than those of us that are trying to do right? Why does it seem like those that are ungodly seem to be prospering better than those of us who are trying to do the right thing? And then he's asking, God, your silence. I can't hear you. In other words, he's questioning God. Why doesn't God intervene against the evilness that is around him? Here is Habakkuk, the prophet, who is on a journey, y'all. He's seeking answers and finding this faith that he has to embrace in God, even in the midst of so much uncertainty. How many of you all can say that's the same way you are navigating right now as we're dealing with the uncertainties of a Trump presidency? In other words, a guy that already told you what he was going to do. You got those in this section of society whining and saying, we didn't know he was going to do this. When those of us, he's already proven himself that he's a liar. You can't trust a liar. You got to learn how to trust. If somebody tells you what they are and show you who they are, you ought to learn how to believe that's who they are. And that's why you are, when we come to this place in the house of God, God is looking at America as a whole, not just one individual. He's looking at a nation that has bowed itself down to capitalism. It's looking at a nation that would even vote to put something as vile as that in office. That tells you what the heart of a nation is. Heart of a nation is not bowing in repentance. Heart of a nation is seeking to have more of what they got already. And so here it is, in a real sense, here is the prophet who is confused. Here is the prophet who is perplexed. He's asking God all of these questions about injustice, and he's asking God about violence, and he's asking God about all of this perversion and wickedness that's in society. Here he is in the midst of all of this uncertainty, and then he says, now God, I just want to know, what are you going to do? Because I need some answers. And guess what? Habakkuk is not going to like the answers that God gives. Because God says, let me tell you in a real sense what I'm going to use. I'm going to use some people to get Judah in line. And the people that I'm going to use to get Judah in line are more treacherous and wicked than y'all are. In other words, I'm going to use somebody that's worse than you to get you in line. I'm going to use your enemy, the Chaldeans, the Babylonians, which are the same. I'm going to use them to put y'all in check. That's just like you all asking God for questions. How can we get out of this fixing? How can we get better? And God is saying, I'm going to use your enemy to get you in line. And some of us can say, God, I don't understand how you're going to do this. I know I ain't good, but I ain't as bad as them. Y'all know how we choose to do. We tend to always pick at somebody else and try to compare ourselves to somebody else. We ain't as bad as them. God is looking at a nation, and he's seeing a nation of Judah, his own nation that has bowed down to corruption. It has become corrupt like the people that they're around. And God is saying the only way I'm going to get them in line is I'm going to use the Babylonians to put them in check. I'm going to use these Babylonians, and let me tell you, I'm going to start by letting them start up in Nineveh. I'm going to allow Babylon to take out the Assyrians who had already taken out the 10 tribes. I'm going to use them then to go into Egypt and take out the Egyptians in Carchemish. And then I'm going to get down to Jerusalem, and I'm going to allow them to put Jerusalem in bondage for 70 years. God says, I'm going to use Nebuchadnezzar to do all of this, just like I used the Assyrians to take out the 10 tribes. I'm going to use Nebuchadnezzar to punish the 2 tribes in the south. I'm going to deal with Judah, and I'm going to deal with Benjamin. But now what you have is a prophet who is trying to figure out, God, what are you doing? And so in the midst of this here, he's wanting to know, God, what's your plan? What's your timetable? Because I'm confused as to why you're going to use the Babylonians to discipline us. And so what you have in your notes is God's first response. And God's first response comes right there in chapter 1, verses 5 through 11. There it is. God is telling you right in those verses, here it is. I'm going to do some things you ain't going to understand. You're not going to appreciate, but you just have to trust me. And so when you look at this in a real sense, he is telling you, I'm going to use some people who are just as vile or more vile than you. And look at how he talks about them. We read that in chapter number 2, but go back to chapter number 1 when he talks about it in a real sense, and you can really break it down, and we can just stay in chapter 2, just because he breaks them down right there in chapter number 2. In chapter number 2, he breaks down the 5 woes. He breaks down the 5 woes that he looks at relative to Babylon. When you sit here and you break all of that down, you get a chance to see just how corrupt and wicked and ungodly are the Babylonians. That's in chapter number 2, after God has already given him a vision and told him to write it down. God has given him the vision for such an appointed time. You're going to have to wait, because God operates in his own time. God is not in a hurry. God has his own plan and his own agenda. And y'all, when we look at this in a real sense, what Habakkuk is doing is Habakkuk is struggling with how wickedness seems to be prevailing. And not just seem to be prevailing, they are prevailing. And so when you think about that, just think about that in this sense, when we listen to it in this vein, Brother Shepherd, why do good things happen to bad people? We always use the reverse. Why do bad things happen to God's people, but why do good things happen to bad folk? Anybody can think about that? I thought I'd put a few down there. It's like the cheaters getting away with cheating. Those who are corrupt getting away with their corruption. It's when the horrible guy seems to get the sweet young lady. It's when a liar's smooth talking gets him or her into getting a better job or position. You know some liars that have been able to mark their way up to the top even with their own corruption? Then when we talk about how is it that the drunk driver gets acquitted because of some legal technicality. When our justice system is just like a revolving door, when we hear that the latest murderer or perpetrator is yet again a repeat offender and has also violated his parole. We listen to this over and over and over again, where we see how the wicked seem to be prospering. And we want to know why. We have questions, why? And so God tells Habakkuk to record what he's about to see. And what is that? The vision that God has. And so he becomes a watchman on the watchtower, watching, looking, witnessing. And he's waiting for that time, because God has given Habakkuk a message, and God is going to do what God is going to do in God's own timetable. And so God assures Habakkuk that though he will use the Babylonians, it does not mean that they will go unpunished. Tell your neighbor, wickedness has a timetable. Ungodliness has a season. And so when you come to understand that, their sins and their violence, yes, they're all outside of God's will, but they're not outside of God's control. And so that means, though they don't serve me, just know I have a purpose in mind. And ultimately, God's people will have their justice. That's what he's saying through the prophet, child. He's saying to the prophet that though I'm going to use ungodly people to discipline God's people, I want you to know, Doris, I got my eyes on the ungodly. It may seem like they're getting by. It may seem like they're getting away, but time is written on it. And let me tell you, I want you to know how I'm going to do it. I'm going to turn the destiny of the wicked and the righteous upside down. The righteous may be on the bottom right now, and wickedness may seem like it's on the throne. But in my own time, I'm going to flip the script. And what is on the bottom, the last shall be first, and the first shall be. That's Bible, y'all. That's Bible. So you got to learn how to get to that place and trust God, because God is the only one that knows how to reverse the fortunes. God is the only one that knows how to turn the tables. That's why you got to learn how to trust him and make sure you on whose side. You got to make sure you on the Lord's side. That's why God is still speaking to the church, y'all. That's why the church doors are still open. That's why the Holy Spirit is still here. Because when God leaves, y'all, his glory departs. And he puts Ichabod over the building to let us know you can show up here, but this ain't nothing but a motivational house. When God's glory leaves here, he's no longer in charge here. That's why you want to make sure that you invite. We sing that song, we welcome you in. Sister Gibson said, we welcome you in. We welcome you in. You are the King of glory. We welcome you in. You want to welcome God in his house. God has to have preeminence in his own place. That's why we all have to check ourselves daily. That's why Paul says, I've got to die to things daily. To the sins and the perversions daily. This is his word to Habakkuk. God's given a lesson specifically about the Babylonians, but what he wants Habakkuk to know is that though it seems like they're winning out, God is sovereign. God is sovereign. Don't give up on God. That's when you have to work and understand how God is operating. Yes, there are some things that are perplexing. Yes, there are things in this culture that's horrific that's going on right now. Yes, it seems like justice is delayed, but justice delayed is not justice forgotten. And the wicked will not escape, because God is in his holy temple. Let the earth, all the earth, be silent before him. Let God just be who God is. You learn how to trust God. And what he says to us when we're looking at all of this here, he wants us to understand what? He wants us to understand in the midst of all of this, Cinda, I'm God, I'm sovereign, I know what I'm doing. I want you to understand where your place is. And Habakkuk, what I need you to do is make sure you speak to the people to let them know that I know that there are two types of people. Come on, y'all. In your notes, he talks about there's two paths. Not only is there two paths, there's two people. In other words, there are the proud and there's the righteous. You got to ask yourself, what crowd are you in? You got to ask yourself, which part are you part? Are you a part of the righteous crowd or are you a part of the proud crowd? And so that's what he's letting us know, is he's letting us know, I know the two categories that we can put everybody in. You're going to fit in one or the other, but you cannot, Brother Shepherd, play both sides against the middle. In other words, you can't be, as Elijah say, betwixt two opinions. You got to choose whose side you're going to be on. And so when you look at this here, he says, I want you to know in verse number 4, what does he say? Look at the proud. Behold the proud. His soul is not right with him. God is letting the prophet know, I know who's with me and who ain't with me. God knows. We can dress ourselves up. We can go through the facade and play like we all holy. But God looks beyond all of the surface stuff. And he looks beneath the skin at the very tedial of our soul. He knows who's for real and who's not. He says, just behold the proud one. Look at their soul. He ain't right. She ain't right. But the righteous will live by what? Faith. That's a powerful scripture, whether you go to Romans, whether you go to Hebrews, wonderful passage of scripture, the just shall live by faith. That's talking about us that are believers. But he wants us to know more than anything else is that when you come to understand when there is wickedness and perversion, even in God's house, God is looking at two categories, the righteous and the unrighteous, the proud and the godly. In other words, there are two types of people. Those who live by what? Faith, and those who live by selfishness. Those who are self-centered, self-consumed. You got those who are Christ-like and those who are self-consumed. And God is saying, one sets his confidence and hope on God, and the other sets his hope and his confidence on himself. Which group are you in? Which crowd are you in? Sister Watkins, which crowd? Are you only concerned about your money? Are you only concerned about your stuff? Are you using the advantages that you have for yourself? Or are you concerned about others? He says, there's two people, and I'm looking at that I'm going to put you in one or two categories. And you can't slide from one into the other. You got to love me with all your heart, your soul, your mind, and your strength. Then you will lead to love your neighbor as yourself. But he wants you to know that I'm looking and I'm able to observe those who put their hope and their confidence in me and those who put their confidence, James Zetter, in themselves. In other words, what he wants us to know, there are no other options that exist. It's just two paths. In other words, you live by faith or you live by something else. You're either putting your faith in God or you putting it in something else other than God. And let me tell you, we can sit here and look at the 5 woes of idolatry. We can look at violence. We can look at all of the stuff that the Babylonians were caught up in. But let's just make it to the day we ain't no different. We got our small GODs. Come on, y'all. We got our idols, y'all. They ain't lifeless idols, but we can put our idols in human beings. We can fawn all over people that we know as celebrities. The stuff that we have. All of the accoutrements that we have. Putting those things ahead of God. And God says, I'm going to deal with you too. That's why you have to ask yourself, which path are you? When you go through that 11th chapter, and you can turn over that to that 11th chapter of Look, Pastor, just turn to Hebrews, that 11th chapter, wonderful, marvelous chapter. Just turn there for a minute, if you will. Hebrews chapter number 11. And when you look at the dynamics there, what I want you to see is it says in verse number 6, and it is impossible to please God without what? Faith. Anyone who wants to come to him must believe that he is, and that he is a reward of them that diligently seek him. Does anybody here know when he's talking about without faith, it is impossible? So the just sinner, the just Sister Gibson, are to live by what? Faith. And that means when you come to understand faith, then when you look at verse number 4, what does it say about Abel's faith? In verse number 4, it was by faith that Abel did what? Come on, talk to me, y'all. What did he do? He offered a more what? Excellent offering than who? Then. When you look at verse number 5, what did Enoch do? By faith, Enoch was what? Without dying, and he disappeared because he what? Because God took him. But before he was taken, he was known as a person who did what? He pleased God. So when we sit here and we look at Noah, look at verse number 7. When we look at Noah, what did Noah do by faith? Yeah, so what he obeyed God. So when we sit here and we look at all of these individuals, when we sit here and look at Abel, when we look at Enoch, when we look at Noah, when we look at Abraham, all of these individuals of faith had a demonstration of a working faith. Faith is not just talking. Faith is what you practice. So when the just are living by faith, that means we are practicing what we believe, even though we don't see it. So that means if I'm in the midst like the people of Judah was, and God is going to use an ungodly nation like the Babylonians to get us in line because we as a whole are out of the will of God because of disobedience, how are the faithful to operate? How are the faithful to operate? Trusting God in the midst of what? Even in the midst of the trials that we find ourselves in when your Medicaid gets taken from you, your Social Security gets slashed. Y'all ain't helping me here. Your government job that's not tied politically to any party gets dismissed. All of these things that can happen. When you see corporate greed taking place now, well, now the billionaires will be able to come in and swoop up all of these healthcare companies that we have. And now it's going to be for more money in their pockets and less available for us. Y'all ain't hearing me in here. And so the bottom line is it's going to be where you can't get sick because you can't afford to be sick. Because you won't even be able to afford it. Because it's more into the inflation is not because of government spending. Inflation is because of corporate greed. And they want more. Because that's what you put in office. Because I want to have more. I'm going to come out here richer than I was when I got there, and it's going to be at whose expense? Those of us that are putting it on the line. Nobody should need me talking about your Social Security. You earned that. That's what you earned. And if y'all would have given us the option, some of us would have taken that money and did better with it. Some of us would have abused it. But they didn't trust us with that process, so they said, now what we're going to do is we're going to take 7.65 of your money, and we're going to take it, and we're going to use it and benefit from it, and then up the road, we're going to give it to you if you live to see it. Y'all ain't helping me. But I'm not going to necessarily give you anything to help you stay well in a real sense, because I hope you don't live long enough to get it. That's where the mindset is right now. Y'all ain't helping me in here. If you 20 and 30, you better shout, help me somebody, and still have some good insurance in a real sense. Because if you 80 and 90, they sure don't care nothing about you. They don't care nothing. If you don't have a mind to go in there and talk the talk, help me somebody, and have somebody there with some sense that know how to talk to them, they'll sit there and roll you in and roll you out without even checking you out. That's the mindset that's going on now. Because we are a nation that don't care. We don't care about people. We care about money. And we're just like where the Babylonians are. When you look at the core of America, you got to look at, it ain't about a few. You got to look at the core. We are in the remnant, the righteous remnant. But the righteous remnant is going to be persecuted. Veterans spent all of their lives serving our country to have us a safe place. And now those benefits, and now they're crying, I didn't think they were going to do this to us. We told you. So watch it. Watch the show. Y'all, it ain't just old folk, young folk dying. And some of them don't even want. You got to force them to get a good benefit package. You can carry them till they're 26. After 26, they got to come off your plan. So you have the two, the unbelievers. That's in 4 and 5. Go back to chapter 2. We talked about the righteous. We talked about Enoch. We talked about Abel. We talked about Abraham. We can talk about all that whole hero of faith walk, but when you go back to chapter 2 and you look at 4 and 5, where it talks about just look, note the sins, y'all, of self-sufficiency. Look at how they are being deceived. Look at how they're being betrayed. Look at verse number 4. And look at the proud. They trust in what? Themselves. And their lives are crooked. But the righteous, we've said, live by what? It goes on, verse number 5. Wealth is treacherous. The arrogant are never at rest. Do y'all see what he's talking about here? Am I reading this right? The arrogant are never at rest. They open their mouths as wide at the graves, like death. They're never satisfied. Their greed, they have gathered up many nations, swallowing up a whole lot of folk. America's got some stuff it's got to pay for. What is he saying here? What's the profile of the proud? Drunkenness, arrogance, greed, restlessness, war. Well, what is that? Well, we talk about the Babylonians, but he's going to get to us, wanting more and more territory, more and more power, more and more wealth, more and more glory, more of almost everything that cannot satisfy your own human soul. Billionaires want more billions. Y'all ain't helping me. And you taking out the constraints so they can get it without anybody tying their hands. And we can't do nothing but protest and whine. And too silly to go vote. And the only time this country has been scared is when our young folk, when Black Lives Matter sat there and pulled folk all over the world together and galvanized. It scared Fort Worth like I never seen Fort Worth was ever scared. Who's going to be the generation that rises up? It's got to be these young folk. Scared Fort Worth like it had never been scared before. That it brought out tear gas. Because the young folk knew we going to the economic base, we hitting 7th Street. And they'll block the bridge to stop you from going there. But they had not. But what scared them is that their own daughters and sons was in that gang. Now, that's what threw them for a whole loop. They don't mind if Junebug do it, but when they little Susie and their little Jim is in the race, it's a different game. It's a different game. You got to risk something. It's got to cost you. Old men and women dream dreams. Young men and young women see visions. Young folk got the visions. We dream the dreams. They got to be able to gain from us the wisdom that we had, because we were my generation and the right before, we were the generation that learned the whole process of protest. But we lost the aspects of it by trying to acquire getting to the top. We forgot who you bring with you. We lost the sense of community because it was all about the acquisition of stuff. Because we wanted what the white man had, and didn't realize how rich we were before we ever got in it, when Como was at its best in the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s. When it was in its best. When you could roll down Borneo and see this. I'm not even here. I'm just reading the history and watching the story and reading the pictures. And listening to the stories. Because I had it in my own community. Saw the same thing. You go down Lowndes Avenue, everything you needed was right there. You ain't had no Safeway back then. You ain't had no Walmart back then. You ain't had no Albertsons back then. Now you had Jim's Grocery. It was a black man and a black woman. And I would get 50 cents for going and unloading the truck. Man, that's big. 50 cents, 2 for a penny cookies. Man, 50 cents lasts me for a while. Y'all don't even know what I'm talking about. Go to $10 lasts for a whole month. That's a Happy Meal for y'all. This all she gave me was $10. Young folks, I wish I could give my child $10. I done just about adopted Cameron in. Cameron come in, Cameron Cameron eat for free. Sit down at the table, order everything, make sure he get everything he for free. Oh, Doris, you got to answer for everything. I ain't asked you to get in. I'm trying to make a point. $10, $20, that was money. We've lost that sense. We've lost that sense. And so what do you see here? What he's talking about, the ungodly. Restless. Why were they restless? They were restless because they were greedy. They didn't know God. And y'all, we can take our minds and our eyes off of God when we're caught up in greed. What's greed? What's greed? Never content. What's greed? Let me give it to you. I like it. Here, wanting more than we need, more than we can use, more than we can even enjoy. That's greed. I want more than what I need. Going in my closet, and that God forgive me every time I walk in there. To walk in my closet, God forgive me every time. And I'm on vacation with my, and bought another pair of shoes. Well, I needed another pair of shoes. God forgive me. And it's not like I'm giving away some to get, and that should be the plan. If I'm going to buy 2, get rid of 5. Y'all ain't helping me teach this. And I'm having to ask God for forgiveness. In other words, what's that greed? Wanting more than we need, more than we can use, and even more than we can enjoy. It's greed. So many of us today are not grateful for what we already have. He was talking about the Babylonians, proud, restless, greedy. In other words, we're talking about material corruption. Am I making sense? And when you look at that, we all have to look at ourselves. And that's why he talks about that in verse number 6, when he talks about that woe to him who increases what is not his. So when we get back to this here, I want us to look at the fate of the proud. When you sit here and you look at the ramifications of being ungodly, when you look at the ramifications of being arrogant and haughty, what you get a chance to see is that God is letting them know that if you are not living by faith, you will never be satisfied with the stuff you get. You'll never be satisfied. You'll constantly be restless. And then when you look at this in the real sense, and what I want you to see here is something, what God himself says. Look at verse number 6. But soon, look at what he says is going to happen. Their captives will taunt them and will mock them, saying, what sorrow awaits you thieves? What does God say? God is saying to the Babylonians, you ain't got to worry about the Babylonians, because guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to allow eventually their enemies to taunt them. The very folk they're misusing are going to be able to turn around and taunt them. You're on the top now, but God can flip it. And I'm going to allow you to be subjected to the taunts. Listen what God is saying. God is making it interesting. And not only that, this is the most interesting thing that I saw in verse number 6. Do you all see it right here? Look at what God, what sorrow awaits you thieves. Now you will get what you deserve. God is a just God, y'all. You've become rich by extortion. But how much longer can this go on? That's another question, just like Habakkuk was at. Lord, how long shall I cry and you not hear? Who's speaking in verse number 6? God is. God is. And what you don't miss here, what I don't want you to miss is that God is not only describing the taunts of those who are going to survive the captivity, but what he's also wanting you to recognize, he knows the timing is hard for us who are creatures to understand. We're trying to figure out, Lord, how long are we going to have to endure 47? How long are we going to have to endure mega? How long are we going to have to endure this plight? Because God is answering. It's not Habakkuk, y'all. Habakkuk is doing it in chapter number 1. God is speaking in verse number 6, Sister Linda, and God is bringing it up because he knows his timing is hard for us to understand. He knows that. And that's why, in a real sense, he is saying that we have to, the just have to live by faith and trust in who? In God. We got to trust God's time. We got to trust him even when we can't trace him. That's why he recognizes. God understands that we're going to be asking these questions. And he wants us to know, don't worry about it, because their greed is going to get the best of them. Don't fret over it. Their greed is going to get the best of them. And just guess what? I'm going to deal with them in my own time. That's why he brings out the woes. And when you think about all the greed that we have, I can go Bible on you with greed. A few weeks ago, I told y'all about Ananias and Sapphira. Y'all know them in Acts chapter 5. Y'all know those individuals. I think it was Sister Taylor asked about, and I told those individuals showed us about greed because they tried to project themselves as being something more spiritual than what they were, that they were selling their property and giving everything that they sold back to the church. No, they didn't. They kept back a whole lot of it. They lied via the Holy Spirit that they were being generous when they were not. That's just like some of us, we take out of this pool to pay for this pool. We take out, we ask for loyalty. Y'all know what we do. We ask for loyalty. Loyalty is $200 over and above, but it's $200. So my tithe is $200. I'm going to take the tithe and I'm going to just put it on the loyalty. Say, you ain't giving no sacrifice. All you did was just rob one and move it over here. And we trying to project like we're being faithful. We're lying. That's deceit. God knows it. Don't put your head down. Raise your head up. That's deceit. It's a sacrifice. If you don't, you don't. But don't project something and portray something that's not. Because God knows. And God honors sacrifice. That's why we say it all the time. Y'all hear me say it all the time. In Luke 6:30, give and it shall be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over. The same spirit that you give, it comes back. The same sacrifice, the same spirit of reciprocity, it comes back. When you sacrifice much, guess what? God is going to release much. That's why it's more blessed to give than to receive. And that's why he is saying over and over again, woe to the wicked. Which group are you in? Are you in the faithful group? Or are you in the proud group that's only concerned about what? Self. We think about all this. I was talking about earlier. Greedy for-profit companies that are now going to be in charge of our medical treatments. And they are determining if they are going to pay for the surgery or not. And if you don't have the money, guess what, Sister Gibson? You don't get the surgery. They make the determination whether you have the surgery or not. Because it's about greed. They don't care. And if we don't understand the dynamics, you all, of what the church is as God's household of faith, to be able to make sure that we can touch the hearts of those that are proud and wicked and that are full of greed, there's not going to be a change. We used to care. We don't care now. You want to have a sense of humility? Spend some time going through the nursing homes and go through the hospitals. Just spend some time going through it and just looking and listening. People are grabbing on you when you go into the nursing homes. They want somebody to talk to them. When we sit here and start feeling sorry for ourselves, go and take some visits to those who are hurting worse than we are. It'll humble you in a minute. You ain't got to go too far. Right here in our own church, we got members that are going through their own seasons. All of us are going through something. Stay sick long enough and watch people quit visiting you. They'll start asking other folk about you. So when we look at what Habakkuk is talking about, y'all, Habakkuk is breaking down stuff here in a real sense where he's letting us know that, hey, not only do we have an issue with greed, because that's one of the woes. Look at verse number 9, where he goes in. What sorrow awaits you for building big houses with money gained dishonestly? You believe your wealth will buy you security. Woe to him who will get evil gains for his house. When you think about that, you all, it's a reminder, you all. Look at what Babylon was doing and look at what we're doing. Look at what he's saying. Verse number 9, sorrow awaits those who build big houses with money gained dishonestly. You believe your wealth will buy you security. Put your family nest beyond the reach of danger. You think that. Affordable housing is not even affordable now. People that with raggedy shanties can charge you $1,500 for a place to stay. Y'all ain't helping me teach this. It's almost cheaper to be homeless than to have a house. And there you look at the dynamics. And what he is saying is the fall of Babylon is going to be so great. It reminds us that what a man builds without God can never last. You can build your great cathedrals grand and tall, but only what you do, Chef, for Christ will last. We can build all these wonderful houses and nothing wrong with it, but I'll never want my house to look better than God's house. I've said that for 30 years of pastor. 28 here, going on 29, and 2 at the other church that I pastored before I got here. Never want God's house to be less than my own. God deserves better. It ought to be clean. It ought to be maintained. It ought to smell good. And if I had more, I'd put even more into it. You can sit here and a building of HD step-toe, it deserves a paint job just like anything else, new flooring just like anybody, a new bathroom just like anybody, a different kitchen just like anybody. If I'm going to keep the building, I might as well do something with it. When you look at that dynamics, what it's saying, these were exploiters. They're going to lose everything. And man's utopia will turn out to be a disaster. Y'all, we can't exploit people made in God's image and expect to escape God's judgment. You look at where it is now, you're going to see it in these next 4 years, a great sense of exploitation. You're going to hear about the 1% getting richer and richer and richer, not even being taxed. And those of us that are middle class and just under are going to be taxed. Because what you want, what they're looking to build is a caste system of the haves and the have-nots. And all of us, when you look at the Bible, when the church was at its best, what did the people do? All of them shared of their substance. All of them shared of their substance. That's what's been the blessing here, that the whole system, you all, that we look at of Social Security and paying in, the whole process of it, you all, is that Linda's generation, Ella's generation, it was the generation before them that paid in, so that Linda's generation, then they pay in so that I'm able. I pay in so that the next generation pays in so that the next generation can benefit from it. That was the whole process of it. One generation helping the next generation. And the whole thing of when we look at the kingdom and the church, we look at next year, you all will be 90 years old. Next year, Como will be 90 years old. And if the Lord lets me live, it'll be still 5 pastors in 90 years. And it will be 90-30. 90 years as a church, 30 years as the pastor. 90 years. But I stand on the shoulders of those that did it the other 60 before I got here. Y'all understand what I'm saying? This wasn't paid for, but it was built when I got here. But through my leadership, we paid it off. Put all this in, put this in, all this stuff, it's all paid for. The next person, I don't have to worry about an educational facility. It's already paid for. You stand on it, you enhance it. I'm trying to get that over there. I got 5 hands and 5 people in the deal in there so that you don't have to struggle with that. Tear it down, connect all. But you got 5 hands in it. And it's all greed. But I got my eyes on it to get it. Not for me, it's for the generation that comes after. You stand on the shoulders of those that are before you. We could have got a piece of property behind me for $5,000, but didn't have the vision to see it. Now you can't get it unless it's $50,000 to $70,000, $100,000. Raggedy house back there they were going to give for $5,000. You won't have a vision to see it. That's why I bought up everything I could. And where we have parking lots for people to park their cars. You got to have a vision that's bigger than us. We passing it on to the next. And then the next will build on that. But you don't get tied to this. This ain't ours. This belongs to God. Come on, y'all. This is God's. We are just to be good stewards of it. I got to give good stewardship of my accountability to God when I kneel before him. And I give accountability before all of you. All 5 of us up to this point will give stewardship. From MC to OB to CC to HD to no middle initial. Because I told y'all I'm the grace pastor. I ain't supposed to be here. I'm the grace. Only by the grace of God. So when we look at this and we see what's here, we get a chance to see, you all, that ultimately he is saying, when you get to verse number 10, but by all of the murders that you committed, all the sins, you have shamed your name. Y'all, what he's saying is the sins you are doing, you hurting yourself. When we sin against God. When we sin, we hurt ourselves. So when we look at this here, and that's why he is saying, woe to wickedness. Woe, 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 5 times. David told us in Psalm 51 that all sin is ultimately against God. And there are ramifications. Then he gets into the whole dynamics. Then he goes to another woe. Look at verse 12 through 14. What sorrow awaits you who build cities with money gained through murder and corruption? Has not the Lord of the heavens armies promised that the wealth of nations will be turned to ashes? Woe to he who builds a city with bloodshed. Look at all they did. Look at all that they built at the lives of innocent people. Look at how proud they were. When you sit here and you look at all that the Babylonians did, and you look at what we're doing even now. Look at what we're doing. Not a sense of concern and care, but ungodly. What is Habakkuk really saying overall to us today? What are you gleaning from this? How do you see this parallel America today? I'm asking. What do you see from all that he's talking about in these 5 woes? The just shall live by faith. What do you see from Habakkuk that he is telling us as we're reading this in the 21st century? What do you see as a parallel to today? Aaron? And then I'll come to you, Dickie. Aaron? What's the parallel? That's it. Say that loud. The struggles will not stop. That's exactly right. Very well said. Yes, but where is your trust? There has to be that level of trust. The struggles ain't going to go away, but you ought to be gaining what? Strength. That's where you ought to be gaining. You ought to be gaining the strength to trust God. Trouble don't last always. I got faith in God that God's going to see us through. If he doesn't see me through it, he's going to take me home to be with him. And that's okay because I'm going to win either way because this world is not my home. But if you're trying to stay here and dig your ground in here and build you 1,000 castles and act like you ain't going to never leave here and put all that stuff on your face and in your vein to try to make yourself look young, stay young, and believe you're going to be here, y'all, we getting old and we're going to leave here. Eventually, the Grim Reaper is going to catch up with all of us. Dickie boy. You probably do. Fred Brazil told us the other day, man, cut some of that stuff off. Oh, yes. Yes. Yeah. No, it's prophetic. It's not scary, it's prophetic. That's what it is. It's prophetic. Yes. That means I can spend more time in my Bible than watching MSNBC like Linda Hudson is every day over there just miserable and listening to all that bad. I just got to listen to what they doing. No, I don't. I already know what they're doing. They're still lying. I want to stay abreast of what they're doing. God can help me and lead and guide me because I can turn it off, y'all, and turn it back on. The engagements has not, it's the same old stuff. It's the same old stuff. I told my mom, cut that stuff off. That's why you always going around here anxious about everything. Baby, you 95 years old. Cut that TV off and go listen to Steve Harvey and laugh. Read your Bible. sitting here listening to all these naysayers saying that. What? Aaron is right. The suffering is going to be there. The poor you're going to always have among you. What are we learning from this prophetic word? Let's get a young person's perspective. Jonah just walked there. Come on, Maya. What are you gleaning? What are you young people's perspectives? What are you gleaning from this prophetically? Here, Maya. Jonah. She goes to Solomon. She gives us a wonderful old scripture cliche, nothing new under the sun. I'm almost going to ask her what that means, because y'all know I gave y'all the real principle of what that really means. See, that's what I'm saying. Doris always talking. What's the key to unlocking, since she brought it there, what's the key to unlocking what Jonah just said? In Ecclesiastes, when we studied that, she only gave one principle. What's the key? When Solomon talks, he says there's nothing new under what? And what else? That's the difference. Jonah gave us under the sun. Solomon also says under the heavens. Two different perspectives. Two different perspectives. A lot of us are doing what Jonah did. We're only looking up under the sun. What's up under the heavens? See, when you're looking within, there's a faith perspective. When you're looking up under the sun, there's a worldly perspective. That's what Solomon, that's how to unlock it. You got to unlock it. Because when you're looking at under the sun, you're going to sit here and say, oh, ain't nothing going on. What am I going to do? Under the heavens, God, you got it under control. You got to understand. What are you looking at? Where is your perspective? Okay, Mike, we already got Ecclesiastes. Take it away. You can't use Ecclesiastes. Come on. You're on spotlight. You can't use Ecclesiastes. It's already been used. Young perspective. What are we hearing from this whole prophetic word that we're hearing today? What is it saying to you? What's it saying? Where are we? What is the prophet saying with all of this? I'm listening. I once was young, but now I'm old. I've never seen the righteous forsaken. Help her. All right, Doris, I'm listening. See that? See that? Yeah. Who else? What are we seeing? Yes, Doris. Yes, this is Sister Shepherd. Mm-hmm. You're praying. Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. Good points. Gotcha. You only get that perspective by being what? A person of faith. That's why you have to, when you're a person of pride, you're only concerned about yourself. What Gloria is saying in the real sense and what the prophet is saying is history repeats itself. That's what he's saying. It repeats itself. We can sit here and be straight legs now, but bell bottoms coming right back in. All you got to do is just keep your clothes, all them clothes, just keep them in the closet over there. Just keep them in there. It's going to come right back around. And you're going to you ain't got to spend $300 for something you already spent way back. Chuck Taylors right now. Chuck Taylors I could get back then. Chuck Taylors cost more now than they did back when I was a kid. And I got a free pair because I was an athlete. But now I got kids, y'all wearing Chuck Taylors right now. And it just goes around. History repeats itself. What will you learn from it? What will you learn from it? That's the issue when we look at Habakkuk. Habakkuk's relevance for the culture that we are right now is prevalent if you can see it with spiritual lens. When you see a country that's caught up in greed, caught up in violence, caught up in being self-consumed, caught up in seduction, perversion, that's America. It wants to be the watchdog for everybody. And it's not even handling its own issues right here, because it hasn't dealt with its original sin, because it's in denial. It's in denial about its own races, past. And that's why you want to cover it up. I don't want to talk about. I want to deal with DEI. We want to make DEI a black thing, and now they understand it ain't a black thing, y'all. It's everybody's thing. Women are subjected to it. Everybody hurts from it. And now they're learning. They want to make it a black thing. It's bigger than that. And so those are the issues that we wrestle with when we sit here and we break all of this down, and he is breaking it down one by one by one by one by one by one, and letting us know that we all have to be conscious about worshiping false gods. As I close this, we have to be conscious about all of this, because y'all, when we do not embrace these things that even the prophet is saying, it's going to lead to our ruin. You break down these 5 woes. What are the 5 woes? I brought them into 3 categories. I just reduced them into 3 categories. But you got greed, you got injustice. What else do you have? What's the 5 woes? You got greed, you got violence. Let me give them to you so you can have them. You got the first ones, 6 through 8. It's going to be what? Greed. So you got greed in verses 6, 7, and 8. And all of these woes are 3 verses that are all tied together. Then you're dealing with what? Injustice, 12, 13, and 14. Then you're dealing with next, idolatry, 15, 16, 17. Then what's the next one? Destruction. 18, 19, and 20. So we have what? Destruction. We have what else? Going back up. Idolatry, that's 2. Going back up. What's the next? Injustice, number 3. What's the next? Violence. And then what's the next one? Greed. You break all of those down, those are the 5 woes that God speaks to Babylon, and letting Babylon know, and any nation today, that you are not going to get by. In other words, what he's letting you know, in a real sense, is that all of us in here, when we think about all of these characteristics of the Babylonians, God is saying they too will be punished. Because from every one of those particular woes, God is letting them know the exact punishment that each of them will absolutely endure. So when you talk about in 18, 19, and 20, the destruction, woe to him who depends on lifeless idols, empires built on destruction will eventually fall. All of these lies that you put into play, and that's what you got in place. And Gloria is saying something very well. You pray for the leadership. You pray for a heart change, because that's the mindset of Christians. Christians want to see transformation take place. That's what you want to see. And it's difficult. It's difficult. You got to be godly. You got to be godly to pray for your enemies. That's God. You got to have God in you to not, to those that despitefully use you, you are putting them in a spiritual space. Y'all, that takes a whole lot of God. You got to practice what Gloria is saying. She's saying that. Only God knows if she practices that. but she's saying the right things. And y'all, let me say this, and I can close it on this point. Just because it's legal doesn't mean that it's right. There's a lot of things that's legal, but it does not mean from God's perspective that it's righteous. It's legal for two women to get married, but it's in God's eyes, it's not righteous. Well, I say it the way it's legal for two men to be married, but it's not what? From God's eyesight, it's not what? Righteous. So when we bring this to summary and we bring this to conclusion, let me just say this. God is responding to the prophet's complaints with 5 truths. And the reason why I said this is because Aaron Peoples has my first one. And Aaron Peoples is right. That's why I said amen. God's children will always struggle to understand God's ways. You'll never understand the ways of God. His ways are beyond our ways. We're going to struggle with his timing. We're going to struggle with, Lord, why me? Why this? Why now? That's why you got to grow to that place of faith where you can trust him. Number 2, the righteous are to live by faith. Faith in God and in God's word. Which path are you on? The righteous path or the proud path? Number 3, the wicked will ultimately reap what they sow. Justice always will prevail. Number 4, who's in control? God is in control. Nothing is outside of his sovereignty. Number 5, God ultimately wins. God ultimately wins. What does Habakkuk do? Minister Bergen, when he gets over to chapter 3, Habakkuk just recognized, listen, I can't change nothing, but I can change me. I can worship. I can worship. I can find joy in the God of my salvation. I can worship. I can rejoice. And that's what Habakkuk does. He doesn't get all of his answers, but he recognizes that God knows what he's doing. And so in this sense, for all of us in this generation, whatever generation you're a part of, is that, yes, history repeats itself. Are you going to be knowledgeable to know what to do? Recognize that sin is not going to leave us. And let me tell you, sin is going to get more perverse. It's going to get, because a nation, this nation, you all, as I close, it's not getting to a place where it's going more and more godly. It's becoming more and more ungodly. And now you're going to see just how peculiar you're going to be in a world that is not going to be spiritually fit for you. It's going to be more, either the world is going to shape you to be more like it, or you are going to be peculiar in it. And you're going to say, this world ain't my home. I don't fit here. It's going to be one or the other, y'all. Either it's going to shape us and we are going to become more worldly, or we are going to become more peculiar and more persecuted because this world ain't our home. Because if y'all think we come into a utopian society where everything is going to be cheesy over here, you in a dream world. We're getting ready for a bloodbath of a mighty war. And the ultimate war of wars will be that ultimate battle of Armageddon. So it will be a false Christ, this anti, that will show himself eventually, that will be for 3.5 years, bring this world together in a false unity. I'm hoping and believing that the church will have already been raptured. But if by chance you don't make the rapture, you won't be a believer that's still here. Because the believers will be raptured, the ungodly will remain. Well, I'm going to get saved when y'all leave. You will have a spirit of delusion on you that if you didn't believe him while the spirit was here, what makes you think you're going to believe him while he's gone? Oh, there's a chance. There will be those it will be much more difficult. because you'll have to sell your soul to be able to survive. And that's what you're already seeing right now. People are selling their soul to a man that ain't but one TikTok away from being away from him. All of us are. Better put your trust in God. I'm done. God bless you. God bless you. I'm done. Any questions? Any questions? Yeah. Injustice, 3, you have giver number 4, idolatry, and then number 5 is destruction. Those are the 5 woes. They are named various different names if you go through, but it's 5 woes that God cast against the Babylonians. And let me tell you, for us today, when you put what I want you to do under each of those woes for your study, I want you to put under for us today. How does those woes parallel to today? The greed of Babylon to the greed of today. The injustice of Babylon to the injustice of today. That's what I want is your biblical assignment that you put in there, because that's how you make the parallels. We good? All right? All right, please, we got baptisms. Let's get this right. Baptisms this Sunday. Let me get my mind right here. Something I'm supposed to be saying that I don't want to forget. Yeah, baptisms on Sunday. Galilee Griggs next Saturday will be here. Next Saturday, please, for all auxiliaries, Urshas, women's. Dr. Franklin will be teaching in the women's division. We'll have something for our men, youth. Please, all of us be available for that. There will be, you all, a town hall meeting at Great Commission next Tuesday evening for our district, District 4, 5, 6. That's Chris Nettles, Jared Williams, District 4. I don't know if that's not, I don't think that's Beck. But it's going to be Tuesday. I'll make the announcement on Sunday on that. Also, this Sunday, your registrations, those of you that are going to Como Kids Camp, your $50 registration fees are due. Had a meeting with China and Reverend West on yesterday. Those individuals, youth, adults going on that, those deposits, $50 deposits will be due on this coming Sunday. Again, thank you, Holy Spirit. Again, I've been gone. Thank you all for those that supported Mount Olive last Sunday night. Oh, the choir, just the church, just to make me proud, just to support the revival, those that showed up Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, which was the worst night of the weather, but probably we had the greatest high spirit. Pastor closed on that. We had a great time. All 3 nights at Mount Moriah, West Mount Moriah. Thank you all for showing up, especially those that were in the community that didn't have to drive far that came. That was last Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I think Ella was there every night. Those several of you that were there every night for that, and it was a wonderful time for that. Our revival will be coming in the month of May, and we're going to be having our community churches participating with us in that as we're going to be working. Our churches are going to be working to do things together. Doris, we're still praying for you in the breaking of your family circle with your sister. Be praying for my family, my mother's cousin, Jake Smith, the oldest of our family, passed at 100. His services will be Saturday in Forney, Texas. Continue to pray for my brother. Forney is on the other side of Dallas, over by Garland. Yes, it's one of those suburbs that's blown up in that. So any other questions, announcements? Those of you that came out in the 19-degree weather on Friday, we was out there all wrapped up and all of that good stuff. We did that on Friday. Thank you all for serving and Brian for taking our seniors their food. For Maya and Carly, y'all put y'all hands together for them young folk. They went out there in all that cold and sat in the building. I was gonna say that sat in the building. They was in the building more than I went in to get some Kleenex, but they was in the building. Father, forgive her, for she has sinned. Father, forgive her. Now, Brenda, now see, I'm finna break it down. Now, I got there. What did she say? She was there 2 hours. The pastor got there at 8:15. So that means she was there at 6:15. You see how that hyperbole? See how she stressed that? You know she wasn't at no center at no 6:15. Stop that nonsense. Y'all see what I got to deal with? I'm gonna give her that she beat me there. Even though I didn't see him. But not no 2 hours. You see how that stretched from an hour to 2 hours? Next week it's gonna be 3 hours. Oh, I pastor real people with real problems. Oh, I sure do. Doris, you know that. But I love my young folk. I just thank God for them coming in and serving. I'm going to heckle with them. It's always a good time. For those of y'all that don't come out and do that, it's just a joy. Betty Jenkins and so many of our membership that come out there, Rosalind Hurston, whoever. Bill comes out there and drives through to get him and Alice food. Shep comes through. Linda used to come through. She don't come through no more. But we just have so many of our members. Nyla comes through. Her brother comes through. Just so many of our church members come through. And just the privilege to be able to serve gives me great joy to be able to do that and give back. Amen. Father, now as we prepare now to leave this place, bless the food that has been prepared, the hands that have prepared it. Let it be nourishment for our bodies. Bless our